Hello,
Hey,
Michael.
Koya, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Wonderful. This is working like without any issues. This is good.
Touch
We are
wood.
even
Yeah.
we are even somehow ahead of time.
Hey,
And
that's the first. Okay, that's
yeah, because I think this is the seventh talk that I'm doing, and each time in the beginning there was always some sort of technical issues, and I'm absolutely. Oh, Wangechi just joined. Hi, Wangechi. Wonderful. So we start 2 minutes earlier. Good evening,
yeah.
everyone. Everyone joining us from the sphere of the internet. It's I'm even kind of nervous, Michael. Funny, yeah. Laugh at
Yeah,
me. Yeah, I have a great pleasure to speak to Michael Armitage, and in the series of conversation that we started at Zeitz MOCAA during this pandemic to really reach out to our peers and reach out to regions and territories that we really don't get the time to do on a, in a normal life. And it is also for me particularly it's dear to me because I've been relentlessly speaking and working around institution building, and how much institution building is important to structure our environment. And when I say our environment, I really mean the entire continent. I'm one of those who always speak of the continent as a whole, and in a non-divisive way, because I believe that how, regardless of the diversity and differences and you know multiplicity of the different societies that we come from, we have a shared history, we have a shared present, and we can definitely think of ourselves as a large community. So, speaking to you, Michael, it was important for me because I have to say that when I attended this amazing event that you organized 3 years ago in Naivasha, the gathering, we spent 2 or 3 incredible days with incredible minds in a setting of great generosity and also of great comfort, in a way that I really had the sense in a long time that we were surrounded by trust, and by faith, so to speak. And I sort of left with still hungry of more
Yeah.
gatherings.
Yeah.
and and the very fact now that we are in gathering, to ask you to tell us about the gathering.
Yeah. I think, like you say, for me, the gathering also ended up being something really special and also much more than I could have imagined, really. Um,
Mm.
we kind of began with this idea, or I'd been thinking about doing something like that for a few years beforehand, but I'd always thought, ironically, as we're doing this now, but I'd always thought of doing it online, as it was a much more economical way of bringing people together. It felt much more immediate, and and something achievable. But then when Theaster Gates had invited me to join his Black Artist Retreat in Chicago, I saw the effect of just having everybody in the same room, and what happened when you were outside of constructed conversations. And I thought, like, this idea of being together was at the heart of what I was hoping would happen anyway, by bringing people kind of conversationally together. That to bring people physically together was much more powerful and led to many more things that you can't really predict. So yeah, so we then set out with Mukami Korea to bring together a gathering in Kenya and dedicated to artists from the continent or working on the continent, or I should say art, because we had 52 artist practitioners from 12 different countries come along. And really, I think the success of it was down to the generosity of every single person that came. I mean, people put a lot of time of themselves, of their own resources into getting there to make it happen. And I think that communal desire and ethos and the need for, you know, those of us who are interested in or working on and from the continent to have a space to talk. I mean, it sounds extraordinarily basic, but perhaps, as you say now, is actually a very good time to be, to be talking about that. But to have that space and to get to know each other. The other thing for us when we were setting out to make it happen that was important was to have people from all different aspects of their kind of career, as it were. So, you know, from so that different ideas and different positions would all be brought into when people were together, and, you know, everyone that came made it really something more than I could have imagined. And also, you know, as you mentioned, Wangeshi had joined, in Wangeshi's words, something that the success of which is in the fact that it would happen again. Like, very ominous words, but true. And I think, like, you know, and as you were also mentioning that now it's sort of 3 years ago, it's definitely time for the second installment in some, you know, in one form or another, physical or virtual, and we're just also trying to figure out the best way of making that happen.
I mean, I just remembered, you know, that what really struck me about the gathering is also the whole preamble to the gathering, so to speak. I mean, you and Mukami is this amazing young lawyer who has this incredible creative mind. I mean, you made everything sound so mysterious, you know. For a long time,
that's
you
because
didn't know where
it was a mystery to us.
What?
It was a mystery to us as well. I mean, this is also the extraordinary thing with it. You know, guys came blind to that. But like, everyone who turned up had no idea.
Yeah, I totally liked it, because I think it was why I was interested in attending, beyond the obvious reason. It was also the whole setup, you know, the whole setup of, oh, we are having a gathering, and like 6 months before, even longer before, you get a kind of an information, this thing is happening, but actually we don't exactly know who will attend, or not. But then closer, actually sort of, you know, speak to this and that, and particularly what I really have to commend you with, and which is something that we don't speak about enough, and it's about the energy and the willingness to contribute and participate. You mentioned earlier that everybody put so much resources in it. I think it was the first event on the continent in my entire almost 30 years career on this continent, in this field, that people launch an art event where you are asked to get yourself there if you want to come. All we can cover for you is lodging and local transport. Anything else you have to bring up yourself. And I mean, I've never seen it before, you know, because we are always thinking that, oh no, we have to provide it. And the gathering.
Yeah, I think, you know, again, like that really is. So one of the interesting things that came up in the selection, well, not the selection process, but the kind of conversations with different people that were invited, was that, I mean, some people just were obviously used to that model where everything was given. And that clearly showed that, you know, this wasn't the right environment for them, and it didn't work out. You know, there were, you know, plenty of people that didn't come because of that. And to be fair as well, like, people expressed like what will to come, but there was a funding issue. We did try to find a way of making that happen if they really couldn't. But, you know, again, we were reliant on goodwill of everyone who came. You know, like, nobody asked for anything more than what was needed, and it like that, it really was a very special thing to be a part of. And, you know, I mean, I didn't really need convincing of the kind of empathy and love that runs through artists, through the art world as is, but that was a very good example of that. You know, I found it like a really kind of affirming gesture, but from everybody that came. And then also one of the other things that was a real kind of well, we didn't guide really, was conversationally, because again, maybe this is also something that will change the next time, maybe not, but again, for me, for us both, actually, we were thinking, you know, do we really want to dictate what comes of this and the parameters of what this thing could be? Or should we just, like, totally, you know, just seat of our pants, let's see what happens? And, you know, and once again, I think, you know, like you said in the beginning, I think there are very productive ways of thinking about the continent as one, and there are very unproductive ways of thinking about the continent as one. And I feel like this was a very good demonstration of, you know, both the differences and the similarities. You know, they were
and
you know,
it makes me think of you know, particularly in this time during this pandemic, where, you know, many of us have, particularly from an institutional perspective, you know, all art institutions globally and particularly in Africa have been hit very hardly. And one of the conversations that comes up all the time when you speak to other colleagues and when you speak to certain artists is always like, you know, what are you doing to support artists? And I'm always like, well, I mean, well, no, listen, I have a totally different position. I mean, in situations like this, artists should have them ask themselves, what are they doing to support those institutions that are really at risk to disappearing? Because somehow I strongly believe that certainly a lot of artists don't really do well in terms of, you know, opportunities, income, and so on. But we also have a whole guild of artists who do very well. So my question is, like, a little bit in the spirit of the gathering, is also to flip that conversation and to ask those artists, what are you doing to support those institutions that are important in your environment, kind of in your territory, so that they continue to exist? You know, what do you think about that?
I think mixed. I think one of the things that, again, because again in the gathering, what came up was talking about institutions and art spaces in cities. And one of the things that I was really, again, struck by is that I really didn't know a lot of the different projects that artists had started, and that, you know, whether, you know, on very different scales, some, you know, much more humble, you know, ambitions, not even ambitions, but much more humble scale, and others on a much bigger scale with a much wider reach. And I do think there are a lot of like really incredible initiatives which are artist led, and often I think artists also don't say that they are doing things when they are. I certainly have spoken to quite a few that are like that. But on the whole, as a kind of attitude and ethos where culture and, you know, culture is a result of community, is a result of people being together. Art is part of culture. It is literally about community. It is literally about others and being together, whether it's within an imaginary space or a literal space or an intellectual space. And for that as something to be the kind of heart of what it is to, you know, that there are some incredibly financially successful artists out there. And I also take on board that, you know, everybody within the community needs to come together, needs to find a way of collaborating and making things work. Because the things, exactly like you're saying, the institutions and the frameworks that do exist were already fragile on the continent. There's very little that's solid, you know, as is, at the best of times.
Absolutely, including Zeitz MOCAA.
Yeah, and we all really need to be a part of that. And I think the other thing that, you know, certainly only recently I've been exposed to is that artists also get asked a lot to give, whether it's work, whether it's, you know, just different things for fundraisers, a lot. And I think, and that isn't a complaint, it's just a point, you know, that also comes with part of the package. And I think, like, there is a responsibility for us, if we want a healthy art world, if we want art to be something, you know, there's this poll that came out today, which I think if I was Trump, I would say we won as artists, where we were voted the least useful, the least useful profession in the world by 71% of voters, whatever it was. But it's just, like, I think we have to take a responsibility for exactly like you said, for the institutions and for the culture and world that we want to create. And you can't sit and criticize.
Absolutely, because I also strongly believe that we tend to lose or grasp or understanding of interdependency. You know, how we are extremely interdependent in any given environment. You know, so the commercial gallery, the museum, the art center, the community center, the studio, the journal, the what have you, that surround this work, or these works, and this incredible creativity. And so we tend to forget that interdependency, because for a lot of us, this contemporary art landscape that started really forming itself or emerging very clearly some like 30 years ago, a lot of it didn't really have in the indigenous, not, I don't want to say in the endogenous models, you know, to form themselves on. So we used a lot of systems. We use a lot of systems and formats that were working somewhere else and trying to apply it in our spaces, whilst forgetting that we don't have to do things like other people do it somewhere else. We can absolutely, we can absolutely connect and define our own environment and not respecting any rules that were established, and establish our own rules, if at all any rules need to be established, you know. So
Absolutely.
so that interdependency for me is very important, because I see it here as I mean, after you know, establishing raw material company and doing all the work that I did in Dakar and accepting this position here at the museum. I mean, it was not my intention to become a museum director, but the initiative of Zeitz MOCAA is so important that I could not just watch rain, you know, or drown.
Yeah.
And
into the museum, like with the studios in command, to, you know, the presentation of the work, to cleaning up the spaces. I mean, it's so exciting to have you as such an important voice, which you already were, but it's so exciting to have that. I think, like, I really respect what you're doing there as well, because it's not straightforward, and it's not uncontroversial to take the steps that you're taking. You know, and certainly, you know, certainly amongst artists that I've spoken to, you've got a lot of us behind you with all those changes that you're making.
I need the entire army. I need the whole army, because it's a real battle, you know. No,
I'm
thank
sure,
you for your kind. Thank you for your kind words. And coming back to this sense of interdependency, because and I particularly believe that we are living a very fundamental fault line in our time today. I am one of those who believe that COVID came to reveal a lot of things, to remind us of a lot of things that we already knew, but that we keep ignoring. Everything that is really, you know, coming to the surface in every country. This pandemic is revealing the real fault lines. And our work as art workers, cultural workers, is even the more absolutely crucial to, and particularly for us Africans, Black people in the world, on the continent. It is extremely crucial that we connect those dots, you know, in terms of the framework that we work with.
Absolutely. And also, like, I'm really not to be afraid of that. You know, there's a lot of people who are willing to make it happen. And I think one of the other things which I would be interested to hear your take is also, once you go beyond the art community and you're dealing with, you know, trying to extend the reach of an institution where, in your case, there's already a huge kind of audience and so on. Like, I'm interested to see how you find that kind of interaction.
Well, I have to say that, you know, when when I came here, you know, a lot of us love to hate, you know, that's kind of the joke among all of us. So, but I had to think beyond, you know, certain personal preferences or not, and see the greater good of the field on the continent. And I also have to say that I'm here a year now. It has been an incredible, enriching, challenging, interesting, complicated, difficult adventure. And I really have to commend the entire team of Zeitz MOCAA. I think most of them are listening in. Who, those that are found in the museum, those that are brought on board, and who have been extremely supportive. And the pandemic has also given us the opportunity to sort of, stop the frenzy a little bit and sort of rethink. I mean, as you said, the museum was already in a quite fragile situation. We were slowly getting out of the turbulence zone, and then COVID-19 happened. So it really gave us the opportunity to rethink the museum again, to do research, to think about how do we come out of this, because I don't think that we can just get out of this situation well knowing that I am now in lockdown since 3.5 months, so that the lockdown in South Africa has been extremely rigorous. So to come out of this and think anew how to connect with the city of Cape Town, which is our home and which is our immediate kind of audience, So we are developing different strategies, and I think that we had a few exhibitions lined up. I mean, we closed the museum literally a week before we were supposed to open a large exhibition of Alfredo Jarre in the context of the celebration of the Rwandan genocide. The Tracy Rose retrospective was supposed to open a few weeks later. I had a conversation last week on this channel with Tracy, and more and more. So we are thinking about how, and knowing that the future mobility will remain extremely volatile, extremely difficult. So we will not rely on, the international visitor that the museum, that forms part of a greater part of people who visit the museum. So the conversation really has to go to Cape Town. And we started by, for instance, organizing gatherings with other art institutions in the city to reach out to them. We had so far one meeting last month. We will have another one soon. So in that sense, and that I will get to back to you in terms of after the gathering, there were so many incredible ideas that were, presented at the gathering, that were discussed at the gathering. And I think the Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute is one of the outcomes of the gathering. You launched this young organization late last year. I'm very excited to visit whenever I can. But tell us a little bit about NCAI.
Yes, NCA stands for Nairobi Contemporary Arts Institute, and the kind of impetus behind it was to create a not-for-profit space which is dedicated to contemporary art and all that surrounds it, not only young up-and-coming artists in Nairobi, but also to tell the story of East African art. Our museum at home doesn't function in the way that a contemporary art museum should function, or part of its kind of remit, which is to give context. So part of what we wanted to do was a series of shows where which tell that story, particularly of East African art and artists. I mean, the number of artists that, quite frankly, a large part of the reason why I'm an artist that I grew up with looking at, you know, people like Sain Wadu, like Mika Shugu, like Maurice Foet, Shalenge van Raffelberg, Teresa Musoke. Like there's so many of these artists, Jack Katarikawe, who just do not have anywhere near the profile and visibility that they should have. So part of our thing was to really try and provide space for them. The other is to support, you know, art projects and ambitious art projects. But I think also for us, which is kind of along the lines of what you're saying earlier, for me, like the success of Nkai will be in our collaborations, will be in how we're able to stand with other initiatives in Kenya, other initiatives beyond Kenya, to stand with the artists that we work with. Like for me, the entire kind of reason for the things are written, and this is how these are the things that are happening, and we're doing it together. And you know, anyone who's a part of that is an important part of the day, knowledgeable or not. We're all in that together. So it kind of came out of that, and we were set to open in April with a retrospective show of Sain Wadu. But alas, you know, I think the events that everybody know unfolded. And so we weren't able to open the space. So we then started thinking how we can, while we don't have a space, how we can be part of our community. As again, we said earlier, how we can positively affect our community. And one way that we're going to do that is through a fundraiser where I made a lithograph that we're going to launch at the beginning of next month, raising money for health charities and cultural, you know, kind of cultural, working with, on the health side, Beyond Zero, which in normal times support women's health, but now have broadened their remit to feeding people and training nurses in COVID-related, you know, techniques. And the other is with a classical music charity set up in Kouoh called Ghetto Classics. And then there are what we will do as in Kai, you know, where we'll set up artist hardship funds, COVID hardship funds. So hoping that, again, artists will apply and we'll be able to distribute some of the money like that. So really thinking, I'm trying to think of our kind of responsibility to our community, both as an art community and then as the broader community within our city, seeing as we do call ourselves Nairobi Contemporary Arts Institute. Yeah, and then the other aspect of what we're doing, again, which is about collaboration, is our first physical show will be a collaboration in Munich at the Haus der Kunst, and it'll be an overview of figurative painting from 70s, 80s, and 90s in Kenya. And that's also been really interesting going forward, because a lot of German collections have a lot of East African work, and I was wondering where it all went. a lot of it was bought by German collectors, both institutional and private. So, you know, we're hoping to begin these relationships that will also be key to being able to display the work of the artist from home, you know. So it's really, they're also deciding, you know, because there were lots of kind of different ways we could have gone with this, whether it was to start with an educational aspect or not. But from conversations largely around trying to do the gathering and then what followed, the need for a kind of functioning arts institute in Kenya that's dedicated to visual arts seemed perhaps both pressing. And then with that comes education and all the other aspects.
I mean, when I hear you speak, it warms my heart so much, because you bring into the conversation or into the practice around NCAI, something that is so fundamental in the creative practice of the continent, the communality, the collectivity. And I keep thinking that at some point, I think that modernity did us a total disservice, you know, in the sense that we adopted this disconnect of the arts and its role with the community, and particularly visual arts. Particularly visual arts have been, you know, in the last 100 years, totally, you know, extracted from a sphere of thinking, from a sphere of production, and also from a sphere of producing knowledge that totally, I think, isolates it from, you know, the wider kind of communal sense. And this is also why I believe that, you know, there is always this thing that, oh, there is no real culture of museum, of gallery going on the continent. I don't think that the problem is the art as such, but the problem may be the spaces where we show that art, we present that art. What do you think?
Yeah, that also makes me think of this. I remember talking to somebody I really respected, an elder artist, and they said maybe the thing with it is that it's just so bad. And I was just there thinking, like, seriously? That's what you got from this thing? Like, seriously? And then I thought, well, you know, then I remembered thinking about myself as well, the first time I saw Titian. And I just thought, this is so bad. Like, I remember looking at like this painting that a tutor at the time, you know, was saying to me was the greatest thing ever made. And I really thought it was horrendous. I thought it was dull. I thought the guy couldn't draw. I thought, you know, like there's these funny spaces between the figures. Like, why couldn't he deal with that? The color use, to my eyes, wasn't what I was used to, you know. And I think, like, trying to create something that's agile enough to take on a different aesthetic and a different sort of institutional aesthetic. I think is like super important, and to kind of judge things on not how they mimic what other countries and other longer lived, you know, art centers have done, but do something that really, you know, embodies the needs and and the culture, you know. It is for me like the thing that's really important, and it's actually incredibly difficult. It's extraordinarily difficult because you always have these conceptions of, you know, to do my exhibition and for it to feel like it's a real thing. I need my white wall. I need to do this. I need to do that. Where it's not necessarily the case, and perhaps it's the you know.
Yeah, exactly. And you also and we particularly in these sort of very established kind of spaces and halls and institutions, we have totally lost the sense of experimentation, trial and fail, trial and error, you know. Nothing has to be perfect. It doesn't have to be lining totally properly in behind the in front of a white wall. And this is why, I mean, you mentioned, a lot of people mentioned the experiment with Kemang of bringing the studio to the museum. I just felt like, I don't even think that it's so groundbreaking or it's so extraordinary. I just think that this, you know, no, seriously, it was such a no-brainer for me. You know, I just felt like, this is what we need to do, you know, because the space of the museum is such a limited space. In order to provide a larger understanding, a larger aspect of artistic practice. I mean, at the museum, what do you see? You see the finished works. you never see the whole process that goes into making art, you know,
For
which
sure.
I think
Yeah.
is even more important than the art itself at the end of the day. You never see the sweat and the emotion and the physicality that goes into making the art. So I was speaking, for instance, I had this conversation in this series with Daudi Karunji, who's someone that I absolutely admire. The fact that Daudi just does his thing, you know. He has a commercial gallery, he has a...
Absolutely. And it keeps also bringing to mind that this thing as well, when I think back at some of the, I'm going to call them institutions, but you know, work galleries that have become institutions, or whether they're artist-led projects that are institutions because that's where our history is. You know, projects in Kenya like Payapa, which was started and kept going by Elimo Njau for many years, and that supported artists. You know, he gave them spaces to work, he exhibited. You know, whether it's Gallery Watatu, which was started by 3 artists, and it kept going, and then it stopped, you know, maybe sort of 10, 15 years ago. There are all these things that I think, particularly in small communities, I think it's very easy for disruption to take hold because of personal differences. And we can also get into a position where we don't recognize the things that we have right in front of us. And we keep thinking like we need to take this, it's always looking out there, you know, when instead of just looking and seeing what's left.
Always speaking of absence instead of picking of presence. Yeah, that's something that I'm very much on. Yeah.
Totally. And you know, and one of the things, so you know, when I was growing up, I would always go to Payapa, and Elimo Njau would be someone I would speak to all the time. You know, I knew there were frictions between some of the artists because of different attitudes and so on, you know, and positions. But Payapa was such like an extraordinary gesture because he gave his life to it. You know, he stopped painting and started talking. As a painter, that's a lot to give up. You know? I mean, I don't like talking that much. Maybe I talk too much, but you know, and that was in support of all the efforts of the, you know, his community. And at the moment, that place stands in ruins. There was a fire; it lost its roof. It's open to the elements. All the work is rotting. It's being eaten by termites. You know, and Elimo Njau is still there. You know, he's still there in a shack next to the place, which doesn't have a roof, because he's still committed to it. You know, and he's still committed to keeping that idea alive, even though there's nobody that supports him. And you know, instead, and this is where I'm with you on this thing about, instead of, you know, as artists, as anybody who's involved in the art community, and also, quite frankly, beyond government, you know, private, you know, anyone who's private who has any interest in art at all, and quite frankly, everybody deserves to be a part of art. Those things that are there also need to be recognized, and it doesn't take much, you know. It doesn't take much.
It doesn't take much at all. I mean, the bad news is just that many of our governments, even those who do very well in terms of, you know, when I, you know, speak about Senegal or South Africa, you know, or Zimbabwe, you know, for the matter on that field, many don't really value the contribution of artistic and intellectual practice to its real value, and to the point where it is part and parcel of building our societies. So, and particularly the visual arts, you know, I'm not saying that there is nothing there, but there could be so much more. And we all know that just a very small push in our field goes a very long way, you know.
Huge difference.
So I blame our governments for that. I blame the African Union for that, because we all work ourselves off to exhaustion just because of the passion that we have. And a lot of these governments and and you know, wider civil society, if you want, benefit a lot from our passion, you know, but our passion costs something. It costs time, it costs knowledge, you know, it costs health, it costs money, you know. So very fundamental social, I would use a different lexicon than, you know, a political scientist or a lawyer or whatever. So I am totally furious all the time that we always have to, you know, justify our raison d'être. You know, we always have to justify why we are doing all this. So we are like 15 minutes to the time, and this thing is quite rigorous. It will stop exactly at the hour. I just want to tell to every one of you, no, every one of you who's listening, if you have any particular questions to us, we will not be able to scroll down all the comments that are coming in. If you really want Michael or myself or both of us to answer anything particularly, post a question. So coming back to, I wanted to talk about the very fact, you know, the museum is closed since mid-March. We don't know when we can reopen. And the very fact that, you know, I mean, in South Africa, museums, cinemas, theaters, and so on are considered, you know, gathering places. We are kind of the last to be reopened, something that really translate also how governments see arts and culture, because I don't understand why retail shops, Zara is open, you know, you can go back into shopping. They have like 1,000 times less space than any museum. But museums cannot open. The very point is also that I don't see any lobbying. I'm new in this country. I'm a foreigner. You know, I don't see any space where a real lobbying can be done, because if retail can open, I mean, galleries and museums can open and respect the same measures of, you know, of safety. So it's also, you know, the whole kind of view and mindset, and well knowing that, you know, for particularly for us at the museum, admission ticketing is part of our business plan. The longer we stay closed, the more fragile we become, the more at risk we become. So, and the other part is that the other thing that you know, I'm losing the sense of physicality, being locked in since 3 months, space. And the one fundamental thing that I've experienced during this lockdown, that we feed on each other's energies as much as we give emotions, which is really our line of work. How are you experiencing that? Have to go into lockdown and so on, and close the museums and the galleries. This whole shift into online, you know, it's just like if boom, like if nothing happened, boom, we have to put it online. It's as if, you know, you can just continue experiencing art the same way. I'm not trying to put the digital space down, not at all. It's very important. It's very, you know, but I still believe that
it's not the real
there
thing.
is nothing that Yeah, there is nothing that we replace, you know, we all know that. So we still have to continue working towards getting in the space of gathering.
100%, 100%. And I always think about this thing with art. Like, why is there so much resistance to it having a place at the table from government and
Yeah.
culture? And I think there's something where, like, art in many ways is like a virus to structure. It's there to challenge it. It's there to undermine it. It's there to, you know, artists are like revolutionaries of the imagination. That's our territory. That's where, you know, where its kind of magic lives. And I think that to a system that's set up to control and limit is very it's an unknown entity.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think like
we have, Michael, we have like 1 minute left, and there is one question that I sort of need to answer. It's from Marta Kazungu. I have been reading a lot about the history of artistic practice, especially in East Africa. One of the appalling findings is that many art, what? Your question is? You didn't finish your question. What is there one of the many appalling findings? I can't read the continuation of your question, and I'm not internet savvy. So anyway, Marta, maybe we cannot answer your question because I can't read it to the end. Anyway, we are coming to an end. Michael, thank you so much. It was wonderful.
No,
I totally enjoyed this. Yeah, the next two conversations will be with Paula Nascimento next week, and following that, we are talking to Wange Chimutu. And love you all. Love you, Michael. Thank you.